Welcome to the extended version of this lesson on the Epiphany. We just talked about how the Epiphany usually happens in the last quarter of your story, how it's linked to the story's moral and to character arcs, and how to ensure even flawless heroes have an Epiphany. Now, it's time to talk about the connection between the Epiphany and the idea of death and rebirth, how the Epiphany is the link between the A story and the B story, and finish it off with an in-depth example of the 2016 animated musical, Moana. Let's start with the idea of death and rebirth. If you've read any books on story structure, there is a chance you've heard this theory before. It's that great stories have an element of death and rebirth. You can see this in the best-selling book of all time, the Bible, and one of the best-selling series of all time, Harry Potter. It's also in a little-known movie called The Matrix, if you've heard of it, so it's safe to say the idea of death and rebirth resonates with us as humans. The beautiful part of the Epiphany is that it shows us death and rebirth, mirroring these unforgettable stories. Except instead of external and literal death and rebirth, the Epiphany showcases internal and metaphorical death and rebirth. That is, the death of the flaw and the birth of the need. The dying of an old part of our personality to make way for the birth of a new, better part. It's a psychological death and rebirth, or growth, and it's at the center of the Epiphany. It might seem like a stretch, or like this is too heady and theoretical, but remember, humans are fascinated with the gods. Most ancient stories revolve around gods, and some of the best-known Greek tales are about apotheosis, one of the steps of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey that means to ascend to the divine. In other words, humans becoming godlike. And yet, in this life, the closest we can get to the gods is to grow to our greatest potential, to shed the negative and replace with the positive, to become more divine. Yeah, you can write it off as a bunch of spiritual gobbledygook, but whether you like it or not, this has been resonating with humans for thousands of years. In fact, becoming your best self is the peak of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we mentioned earlier. So it's safe to say this concept is still around, and understanding it will only make you a stronger storyteller. Finally, let's look at how the Epiphany brings together the A story and the B story. We'll talk about these terms very soon, but to summarize, the A story is the external story or plot, and the B story is the internal story or theme. So we're basically saying the Epiphany brings together the plot and the theme. So, how is this the case? The Epiphany is the moment the protag realizes that to get what they want, or their goal, they'll first have to fulfill their need. Remember how we said the want is external and the need is internal? Well, they are linked to the plot and the theme, which are also external and internal. There's a little magic that happens during the Epiphany because it brings the external story together with the internal story. Until now, it feels like the two have been running in parallel. But when the protag realizes how the want is connected to the need, the audience watches as the external and the internal stories smash together. Don't worry if this doesn't make complete sense right away. After our lesson on the A story and B story, you should have a better understanding of what we mean by the external story and the internal story. And then, if you rewatch this, it'll be a lot clearer. But the line that should bring it all together is this. Until the Epiphany, the protag has been living in the external story with a misunderstanding of the internal story. The Epiphany helps them understand the internal story. And after the Epiphany, the protag uses their knowledge of the internal story to conquer the external story. Now, let's see the Epiphany in action with our in-depth example.
Moana is a 2016 animated musical that follows Moana, an island-bound chief's daughter, as she journeys to return a powerful stone to the island it was stolen from. This story does an incredible job of highlighting all four protag pieces, and has a tear-jerking epiphany as well. Let's see all the pieces in action. To start, Moana has a want of discovery. She longs to explore beyond her island. Unfortunately, her father forbids her from sailing, telling her she is destined to be the next village chief. Moana's grandmother, on the other hand, believes Moana has been chosen by the ocean to perform a sacred task. Long ago, a magical stone known as the Heart of Te Fiti was stolen from its home. Moana's grandmother gives her the heart and sends her to return it, solidifying Moana's goal: return the Heart of Te Fiti to the island of Te Fiti. Specific, tangible, and binary. However, Moana must first find the demigod Maui to help deliver the heart. So she finds him, brings him along, and the two find his magical fishhook to help him shapeshift. Then they head to Te Fiti. The only problem is, Moana hasn't found her need. We know her need is the opposite of her flaw, and in this story, Moana's flaw is self-doubt. She doesn't see herself as a leader or as a hero. Instead, her flaw manifests as dependence on those around her. And right now, Moana is depending on Maui. She hasn't yet learned her need. You can see this flaw all throughout the movie. Moana is constantly relying on the ocean to save her, then she relies on Maui, insisting she is delivering him to Te Fiti to return the heart. On their first attempt at returning the heart, Moana even says to Maui, "Go save the world." Too bad the movie isn't called Maui, it's called Moana, and Moana will have to believe in herself. When their plan fails and Moana is left alone, she sees the ghost of her grandmother. It's then Moana has her epiphany. She has seen herself as a follower under her grandmother and her father, and as a helper to Maui. But she is no follower. She is Moana. Realizing she is a leader herself, she sets off alone to deliver the heart to Te Fiti. And to really solidify this, she not only switches her speech to say that she, instead of Maui, will deliver the heart, but even Maui comes back and says, "Go save the world" to her, highlighting the shift from self-doubt to self-assurance. So as you can see, Moana does an incredible job at not only delivering a cry fest of an epiphany, but also weaving together the 4 protag pieces into one seamless story.
And with that, we've covered the Epiphany, including how it's related to the idea of death and rebirth, and how it connects the A story and B story. Hopefully, our in-depth example highlights exactly how the Epiphany works hand in hand with the other 3 protag pieces. Now, let's finish this mini course by talking about that big thing that stands between the protag and their goal, also known as the antagonist.